Tonight, as the world around you slowly grows quieter, imagine yourself traveling back into medieval Europe. Muddy roads stretch between dark villages. Smoke drifts from distant hearth fires. Somewhere beyond the hills, church bells mark the passing of another hour. And now imagine that you have been accused of a crime. Perhaps it is unpaid taxes, theft, or simply angering the wrong person. In the medieval world, even small accusations could change a life. Laws varied from town to town, and prison was a place of uncertainty more than justice. Behind stone walls, you could not expect comfort, fairness, or even regular food. Much depended on wealth, status, and chance. Tonight, we will quietly explore that world together. How medieval prisons worked, who ended up inside them, and why few places inspired greater fear in everyday life. Part 1. How medieval justice worked. Before you can understand why nobody wanted to end up in a medieval prison, it helps to understand something very important. In much of medieval Europe, prison was not usually the final punishment. In medieval society, imprisonment usually served a different purpose from what many people now imagine. Long confinement was less common, and prisons often functioned mainly as places of waiting before judgment, payment, or punishment. For much of the Middle Ages, prisons were mainly temporary holding places. People were kept there while awaiting trial, awaiting payment of debts, awaiting punishment, or awaiting transfer somewhere else. That meant uncertainty filled every corner of imprisonment. If you were placed inside a medieval jail, you might not know what would happen next. Days could pass slowly into weeks. Information traveled poorly. Officials were inconsistent. Records were often incomplete. In some places, legal procedures barely existed at all. And all of this reflected the broader structure of medieval society. The medieval world was deeply local. There was no single system of law covering all of Europe. Instead, every kingdom, duchy, town, manor, and bishopric could operate somewhat differently. A peasant living in rural England might experience justice differently from a merchant in northern Italy or a farmer in the Holy Roman Empire. Local customs mattered enormously. So did religion, feudal obligations, and the authority of local rulers. In many areas, the lord of the manor held significant judicial power. He could oversee disputes, collect fines, and order punishments. In cities, councils or magistrates might control legal matters instead. Church courts handled many religious and moral offenses. The result was a patchwork system. Justice could depend heavily on who you were, where you lived, and who had power over your community. If you imagine yourself living in such a world, daily life begins to feel more uncertain. You could not simply assume that laws were applied evenly. Wealth and social rank shaped almost everything. A noble accused of wrongdoing often received very different treatment from a poor laborer. Nobles might be kept under house arrest or held in relatively comfortable chambers. Wealthy merchants could sometimes pay for better food, bedding, or treatment while imprisoned. Poor prisoners usually had no such options. In fact, many medieval prisons expected prisoners to pay for their own upkeep. This was common practice in many regions. The jailer might charge fees for food, candles, blankets, or even the chains themselves. If you had money, conditions could become slightly more bearable. If you did not, life quickly became dangerous. Some prisoners depended entirely on relatives or charitable visitors to bring food from outside. Without support, hunger became a constant concern. And yet, imprisonment itself was still only one layer of medieval punishment. Fines were extremely common. Public humiliation was common too. Stocks, pillories, whipping, exile, forced labor, and execution all existed within medieval systems of justice. The goal was often public order rather than rehabilitation. Medieval authorities wanted communities to remain stable. Punishments were designed to discourage disorder, reinforce authority, and display power visibly. This is why many punishments happened in public spaces. Imagine entering a busy medieval marketplace. Farmers arrive with carts of grain. Bakers sell bread. Animals move slowly through muddy streets. Church bells ring overhead. And nearby, perhaps in the town square, stands a pillory. A person accused of theft or dishonesty may be locked there while townspeople gather around. The punishment is not hidden away. It is meant to be seen. Public shame carried enormous weight in tightly connected medieval communities. Everyone depended on reputation. A damaged reputation could affect trade, marriage prospects, social trust, and survival itself. Prison fit into this larger system as a place of waiting, pressure, and control. And because medieval governments were less centralized than modern states, prisons themselves were often small and improvised. Some were located inside castles. Others occupied towers, gatehouses, underground chambers, monasteries, or city buildings. There was rarely a standardized prison design. Conditions varied enormously. Some prisons were relatively secure stone structures. Others were little more than locked rooms. In rural areas, confinement could even occur inside barns, storage spaces, or temporary wooden enclosures. Security also depended heavily on manpower. A medieval prison did not usually contain large numbers of professional guards. Staffing was limited. Escape attempts were common, and escape mattered greatly because medieval punishments could be severe. If someone feared mutilation, execution, or permanent disgrace, escape became a desperate possibility. This partly explains why chains and restraints were used frequently. Iron shackles restricted movement and reduced escape risks. Prisoners might be chained to walls, floors, or heavy objects. Even sleeping could become difficult. At the same time, medieval people viewed imprisonment differently from modern societies. Long-term incarceration was expensive. Feeding prisoners cost money. Maintaining secure facilities required labor and resources. Most medieval rulers preferred punishments that resolved matters more quickly. Fines generated income. Execution permanently removed dangerous individuals. Public punishments reinforced authority. Exile pushed unwanted people away from the community. So when prisons did hold people for long periods, it was often because legal cases moved slowly, debts remained unpaid, or political conflicts became complicated. Political prisoners formed an especially uncertain category. A noble caught in rebellion might spend years imprisoned in a castle tower. Rival claimants to thrones, religious dissidents, or captured enemies could disappear into confinement for very long periods. For ordinary people, however, prison more commonly represented a frightening pause before something else. And because communication systems were poor, prisoners often had little understanding of their own situation. You might not know when your hearing would occur. You might not know whether witnesses would appear. You might not know whether your family had managed to gather money for fines. You might not even know whether local authorities still remembered you at all. This uncertainty created psychological strain. The medieval world already felt fragile in many ways. Harvest failures, disease, war, and famine regularly disrupted life. Most people lived close to survival. To suddenly lose your freedom inside a prison meant losing contact with work, family, income, and community. And medieval communities depended heavily on labor. A farmer absent during planting season could face disaster. A craftsman missing from his workshop might lose customers permanently. Families relied on every member contributing. Imprisonment therefore threatened not only the prisoner, but everyone connected to them. In some cases, entire households suffered economically because one person had been detained. Children might lose support. Fields might go untended. Debts could grow larger. Property might even be confiscated. So by the time a medieval person entered prison, fear often extended far beyond the walls themselves. The prison represented uncertainty layered upon uncertainty. And yet, even within this difficult system, medieval people still sought fairness according to the values of their own time. Trials could involve witnesses, oaths, written records, or local juries. Certain legal traditions gradually became more organized over the centuries. In England, for example, royal courts slowly expanded influence. In cities across Europe, written law codes became more common. Still, daily reality remained uneven. For many ordinary people, access to justice depended on money, connections, literacy, and local politics. And once the prison door closed behind you, those inequalities became impossible to ignore. The stone walls did not treat everyone equally. Some prisoners purchased comfort, others simply endured. And as we continue, we will move deeper inside these prisons themselves, exploring what daily life actually felt like once the heavy door shut and the outside world slowly faded from view. Part 2. Inside the medieval prison. To step inside a medieval prison was often to enter a place that had never truly been designed for human comfort. Many prisons were adapted spaces rather than carefully planned institutions. A castle tower could become a jail. A cellar beneath a courthouse might hold prisoners temporarily. In some towns, old gatehouses or storage chambers were converted into places of confinement. This meant conditions varied greatly. Some prisoners occupied relatively large chambers with access to light and air. Others found themselves crowded into dark rooms with damp walls and little ventilation. The experience depended heavily on location, wealth, and status. If you imagine yourself entering such a place, the first thing you might notice would be the smell. Medieval cities already carried strong odors from animals, smoke, waste, and crowded living conditions. But prisons concentrated these problems. Fresh water was limited. Waste removal was inconsistent. Ventilation was poor. In underground cells, dampness settled permanently into the stone. Many prisoners slept directly on straw spread across cold floors. Over time, the straw absorbed moisture and dirt. Insects and rats were common visitors. Lighting was minimal. Candles cost money. Torches required maintenance. Some cells received only a narrow line of daylight through tiny openings cut into thick walls. And for prisoners held underground, even that small comfort might disappear. Darkness shaped the rhythm of imprisonment. Without clocks, calendars, or reliable schedules, time became difficult to measure. A prisoner might wake, sleep, and wait without fully knowing how many days had passed. The psychological effect of this uncertainty could be exhausting. Outside the prison, medieval life followed familiar rhythms. Church bells marked the hours. Markets opened and closed. Fields changed with the seasons. Inside prison walls, those patterns became distant. And then there was the question of food. Food quality varied enormously from one prison to another. Some authorities provided basic meals consisting of bread, pottage, thin soup, or small amounts of ale, but these supplies were often limited. Many prisons relied partly on prisoners paying for their own meals. If your family could bring food, your chances improved. If you had money, you might purchase better treatment from the jailer. But poor prisoners faced constant hunger. In some regions, charitable religious groups attempted to assist prisoners by providing food or clothing. Christian teaching encouraged acts of mercy, and helping prisoners could be viewed as a religious duty. Still, charity remained inconsistent. One prisoner might receive regular visits, another might be forgotten almost entirely. Jailers themselves occupied a difficult position. They were not always salaried officials in the modern sense. Often they earned income through fees charged to prisoners. This system created obvious problems. A jailer could profit by charging extra for blankets, chains, candles, or improved rooms. Wealthier prisoners, therefore, sometimes lived in noticeably better conditions than poorer inmates housed nearby. Corruption was not uncommon. Bribes could improve treatment. Connections could matter. And in some cases, prisoners who could not pay accumulated additional debts simply for being imprisoned. Imagine the strange unfairness of such a system. A person accused of debt might leave prison owing even more than before. This happened often enough to become a recognized problem in later centuries. Disease also spread easily inside medieval prisons. Medical knowledge remained limited. Germ theory did not exist. Crowded indoor spaces allowed infections to move rapidly. Illnesses that might have been survivable outside prison became much more dangerous within confined conditions. Poor nutrition weakened resistance. Lack of hygiene increased risk. And once sickness appeared, isolation was difficult. Some prisons became known for particularly unhealthy conditions. Yet medieval people were not unaware of these dangers. Writers occasionally complained about prison filth, corruption, or neglect. Religious reformers sometimes called for more humane treatment. But large-scale reform remained limited because medieval society viewed imprisonment differently from later eras. Prisons were not usually intended as places of improvement or rehabilitation. They were holding spaces. Temporary containment mattered more than comfort. And despite the harshness, prison life was not always completely silent or isolated. In many facilities, prisoners communicated with one another regularly. Cells were often shared. People exchanged stories, rumors, prayers, and news. Some prisoners formed temporary alliances for survival. Others fought over scarce resources. The social atmosphere could shift constantly. Political prisoners, debtors, thieves, soldiers, and religious offenders might all find themselves held in neighboring spaces despite very different backgrounds. This mixture created tension, but also strange moments of connection. A noble imprisoned after a failed rebellion might hear the same distant church bells as a poor laborer jailed for theft. Both waited. Both depended on forces outside their control, and both lived with uncertainty. Sound itself became important inside prisons. Footsteps in corridors, doors opening, chains moving, voices echoing through stone chambers, the arrival of guards, the ringing of bells from the town beyond the walls. For prisoners with limited sight or movement, sound helped measure the passing of time. And then there was the cold. Many medieval prisons lacked heating entirely. Stone structures retained dampness and low temperatures, especially during winter months. Thick walls protected against escape, but also trapped chill air. Blankets were scarce. Fires required supervision and fuel. In Northern Europe especially, winter imprisonment could become deeply uncomfortable. You can imagine lying awake at night on rough straw, listening to distant wind outside a castle tower, while cold slowly moves through the stone beneath you. Even sleep offered little escape. Prisoners also faced the constant possibility of violence. Not every prison was chaotic, but conflict certainly occurred. Guards might use force, other prisoners might steal food or belongings. Interrogations could involve intimidation. And during periods of political instability, prisons became especially dangerous places. Wars, rebellions, or outbreaks of disease sometimes disrupted already fragile prison systems. Food supplies might shrink, officials might disappear. Prisoners could be abandoned temporarily during emergencies. All of this contributed to the deep fear surrounding imprisonment. Medieval people understood that once someone entered prison, normal protections became uncertain. The outside world moved on, seasons changed, families struggled, and the prisoner remained suspended between outcomes. Religion often became an important source of comfort during confinement. Prayer helped structure time. Religious texts, when available, provided emotional support. Clergy sometimes visited prisoners to hear confessions or offer guidance. In Christian Europe, suffering could also be interpreted through spiritual ideas about endurance, sin, forgiveness, and salvation. This did not remove hardship, but it gave many prisoners a framework for understanding their experience. At the same time, fear of judgment extended beyond earthly courts. Medieval society viewed law, morality, and religion as closely connected. Crime was not merely a social problem. It could also carry spiritual meaning. This added another emotional layer to imprisonment. A prisoner might fear both worldly punishment and divine judgment. And yet, daily survival often remained the immediate concern. Would food arrive? Would relatives visit? Would the hearing finally occur? Would the jailer demand more payment? Would illness spread through the cell? The slow repetition of these worries shaped prison life. There was rarely comfort, rarely certainty, and rarely privacy. Even wealthy prisoners who secured better accommodations still lost freedom, control, and stability. The prison walls constantly reminded every inmate of dependence. Dependence on officials, dependence on money, dependence on outside support, and dependence on luck. Because in the medieval world, luck often mattered more than people wished to admit. A fair lord could improve conditions. An indifferent jailer could worsen them. A delayed messenger could extend imprisonment. A failed harvest could reduce food. Small events carried enormous consequences. And all of this explains why medieval imprisonment inspired such fear. It was not simply punishment. It was instability made physical. A place where ordinary routines disappeared and uncertainty became part of everyday existence. In the next part, we will explore who ended up in medieval prisons and how social class shaped nearly every aspect of the experience. Part 3. Who went to prison? When people imagine medieval prisons, they often picture hardened criminals locked away behind iron bars. But the reality was far more varied. Many different kinds of people passed through medieval prisons, and their experiences depended greatly on social class, wealth, gender, occupation, religion, and politics. In the medieval world, society itself was deeply unequal, and prison reflected those inequalities very clearly. A wealthy noble and a poor laborer might both lose their freedom, but they rarely experienced imprisonment in the same way. To understand this, it helps to imagine the structure of medieval society itself. Most people lived within rigid social hierarchies. At the top stood kings, nobles, bishops, and major landowners. Beneath them were knights, merchants, craftsmen, clergy, peasants, laborers, and countless others whose lives depended on local systems of obligation. Status shaped almost everything: where you lived, what work you performed, what laws applied to you, and if accused of wrongdoing, how you were treated. Poor people were especially vulnerable to imprisonment. Small debts, unpaid taxes, accusations of theft, or violations of local rules could quickly bring them into conflict with authorities. Because survival itself was often uncertain, even minor financial troubles could become serious. A failed harvest might leave a family unable to pay obligations owed to a landlord. A merchant unable to repay borrowed money might be detained. A wandering laborer without clear employment could attract suspicion. Medieval authorities often feared disorder. Large populations of poor or displaced people worried rulers and town officials alike. Stability mattered greatly in societies where famine, disease, and war already created constant pressure. As a result, prisons sometimes held people not only for crimes, but also for debts, disputes, or social control. Debtors formed a significant category of prisoners in many regions. If someone owed money and could not repay it, imprisonment might be used to pressure repayment. This created painful situations. A prisoner unable to work could become even less capable of paying debts. Families outside prison often struggled desperately to gather funds. Relatives sold possessions. Neighbors contributed small amounts. Religious charities occasionally intervened, but many remained trapped in cycles of poverty and confinement. At the same time, prisons also held political prisoners. These individuals often came from very different backgrounds: a rebellious noble, a rival claimant to land, a captured enemy commander, a critic of local authority. Political imprisonment could become lengthy because rulers feared the influence such individuals still carried. Unlike ordinary prisoners, political captives sometimes received better living conditions, especially if they belonged to noble families. A high-ranking prisoner might occupy chambers within a castle, rather than a crowded dungeon. Servants could occasionally remain nearby. Meals might be improved. Correspondence might continue. Yet even privileged imprisonment remained psychologically difficult. The loss of power, uncertainty about release, and constant surveillance weighed heavily. And political fortunes in the medieval world could change quickly. A prisoner treated respectfully one month might face execution the next if alliances shifted. Women also experienced imprisonment differently. Medieval prisons were overwhelmingly male spaces, but women certainly entered them. Women might be imprisoned for theft, debt, religious offenses, adultery accusations, or involvement in political conflicts. In some cases, separate areas existed for female prisoners. In others, arrangements remained improvised and inconsistent. Gender expectations shaped treatment. Medieval society often viewed women through legal and religious ideas centered on household roles, morality, and obedience. As a result, accusations involving sexual behavior or family disputes sometimes carried particular social consequences for women. At the same time, women generally possessed fewer economic resources and legal protections than wealthy men. This made imprisonment especially dangerous for poor women lacking family support. Children and adolescents occasionally appeared in medieval prisons as well. Modern ideas about childhood differed greatly from medieval understandings. Young people often worked from early ages and could face legal consequences for theft or disorder. Still, treatment varied widely. Some communities attempted leniency for younger offenders, others did not. Foreigners faced additional risks. A traveler accused of wrongdoing in an unfamiliar town might lack local allies entirely. Without relatives nearby, obtaining food, legal assistance, or witness testimony became much harder. Language barriers could complicate matters further. In commercial cities where merchants traveled frequently, local governments sometimes developed more structured systems for handling outsiders. But elsewhere, strangers remained vulnerable. Religion also played an important role. Church courts operated separately from secular courts in many parts of Europe. These ecclesiastical courts handled matters connected to morality, marriage, clerical discipline, and religious offenses. A member of the clergy accused of wrongdoing might therefore face different procedures from an ordinary layperson. This separation sometimes caused tension between church and secular authorities. Questions about jurisdiction could become complicated. Who had the right to judge the accused? Who controlled punishment? And where should imprisonment occur? As medieval states slowly became more centralized in later centuries, rulers increasingly sought greater control over legal systems. But during much of the Middle Ages, overlapping authorities remained common, and all of this added confusion and unpredictability for prisoners themselves. One especially feared accusation during certain periods involved heresy. Religious unity was considered essential to social order in medieval Christian Europe. People accused of spreading dangerous religious ideas could face investigation, imprisonment, or trial. These cases varied greatly across regions and centuries, but they reveal how closely belief and authority were connected. To medieval rulers, challenges to religious doctrine could appear politically threatening as well. Prison therefore became a tool not only of criminal justice, but also of social and ideological control. Still, most prisoners were ordinary people. Laborers, servants, craftsmen, farmers, debtors, people caught in disputes or local conflicts. Their names rarely survived in historical records, but fragments remain. Court documents, town records, religious writings, letters. From these scattered sources, historians glimpse the ordinary anxieties surrounding imprisonment. Fear of losing work, fear of shame, fear of debt, fear of uncertain punishment. And underlying everything was the simple reality that medieval life already demanded constant labor. Most families lived close to economic survival. A single absence could destabilize an entire household. If you imagine yourself as a medieval blacksmith, baker, or farmer, imprisonment suddenly feels larger than confinement alone. Your tools sit unused, your customers disappear, your crops wait unattended, your family struggles to manage without you. And because communities were tightly connected, imprisonment often carried social stigma long after release. Trust mattered deeply. A person associated with criminal accusations could find future opportunities limited. Reputation spread quickly in small towns where everyone knew one another. This is partly why public punishments remained so powerful. The community itself became part of the process. And even after release, consequences continued. Some former prisoners lost property. Others lost legal rights. Some found it difficult to rebuild social standing. Yet medieval society also allowed for negotiation and reconciliation in many situations. Not every accusation ended in permanent ruin. Fines could settle disputes. Local mediation could restore peace. Religious confession and penance sometimes offered paths toward reintegration. The medieval world could be harsh, but it was also practical. Communities depended on cooperation. Permanent exclusion of large numbers of people was often economically difficult. So medieval justice balanced punishment with the need to maintain functioning societies. Even so, the possibility of prison remained deeply unsettling. Because once inside, your fate no longer rested fully in your own hands. It depended on rulers, courts, jailers, relatives, witnesses, money, and chance. And for many ordinary people, those were fragile foundations indeed. In the next part, we will explore punishment, interrogation, and the ways medieval authorities attempted to maintain order through fear, ritual, and public display. Part 4. Punishment, fear, and public order. To understand medieval prisons fully, it is important to remember that imprisonment rarely stood alone. It existed inside a much broader culture of punishment. Medieval authorities believed that order had to be visible. Punishments, therefore, often took place in public spaces where communities could witness them directly. The goal was not simply to discipline one individual, it was to reinforce authority across society. Imagine arriving in a medieval town on market day. Stalls line the streets. Animals move through muddy pathways. Church bells echo overhead. And near the center of town stands a wooden structure used for punishment. Perhaps it is the stocks, perhaps the pillory, perhaps a platform where official announcements are read aloud. These spaces connected justice with public life. People gathered not only to trade goods, but also to witness authority in action. This visibility mattered deeply in societies without modern police forces or centralized bureaucracies. Rulers relied heavily on symbolism, ritual, and reputation. If punishments appeared weak or inconsistent, officials feared disorder might spread. As a result, prison often functioned as one stage within a larger process. A person might be jailed temporarily before trial, then fined, then publicly punished, or exiled, or, in severe cases, executed. The sequence varied greatly depending on region, period, and offense. And because medieval legal systems lacked many modern investigative tools, authorities frequently depended on confession, witness testimony, and reputation. This created problems. False accusations could occur. Personal rivalries influenced cases. Rumors mattered. And evidence standards differed widely. In some periods and regions, judicial ordeals were used. These practices reflected the belief that divine judgment would reveal truth. A person might undergo a ritual test involving water or heated metal, after which the condition of the body was interpreted as evidence of innocence or guilt. Within medieval religious culture, many people believed sincerely that God would guide justice through such rituals and ordeals. Over time, especially by the later Middle Ages, ordeals declined while written procedures and formal courts became more common. Still, uncertainty remained central to the legal experience. Interrogation played an important role as well. Authorities wanted confessions because confessions simplified legal processes and reinforced the legitimacy of punishment. In certain periods, especially during later medieval investigations connected to heresy or political threats, coercive interrogation methods appeared. These practices varied greatly and were shaped by local law and custom. It is important not to imagine all medieval justice as constant brutality. Many cases involved fines, settlements, or negotiated outcomes. Yet fear undeniably formed part of the system. People were meant to understand the consequences of disobedience. And prisons contributed to this atmosphere because they represented uncertainty and loss of control. Even short imprisonment could damage livelihoods, reputations, and family stability. Public punishment added another layer. Humiliation carried enormous social weight in medieval communities. A person placed in the stocks might face mockery from neighbors. Merchants accused of dishonest trade practices could suffer public disgrace that harmed future business. In tightly connected towns, reputation was almost a form of currency. And because communities were smaller and more interconnected than many modern cities, shame spread quickly. At the same time, medieval punishments often reflected ideas about restoring balance. Fines compensated authorities. Penance addressed spiritual wrongdoing. Public rituals reaffirmed social order. Even executions were frequently staged ceremonially to emphasize lawful authority rather than random violence. Religion shaped much of this thinking. Medieval European societies viewed earthly order and divine order as closely linked. Kings ruled by divine sanction. Laws carried moral meaning. Crime could be interpreted not only as harm against individuals, but as disruption of the wider social and spiritual structure. This helps explain why certain offenses received especially severe attention. Counterfeiting money threatened economic trust. Heresy threatened religious unity. Rebellion threatened political stability. Each appeared dangerous not merely because of direct harm, but because of what it symbolized. And symbols mattered enormously in medieval culture. Prisons themselves sometimes became symbolic. Castle towers holding political prisoners demonstrated noble power. City jails reminded residents that local authorities controlled urban order. Even the physical architecture conveyed messages. Heavy doors, stone walls, iron restraints. These objects communicated authority visually and emotionally. Yet, despite these systems of control, medieval justice remained imperfect. Escapes occurred, corruption appeared. Powerful individuals manipulated outcomes, local conflicts disrupted proceedings, and ordinary people sometimes resisted. Communities occasionally defended neighbors against officials they viewed as unfair. Crowds could interfere with arrests. Families negotiated privately to settle disputes before formal punishment occurred. The medieval world was never completely controlled from above. Instead, justice emerged through constant negotiation between rulers, local customs, religion, economics, and social relationships. Still, for the individual prisoner, these larger systems often felt distant. What mattered immediately was survival. Would the sentence involve payment? Would release come quickly? Would family support remain strong? Would reputation recover afterward? Fear of uncertainty often outweighed fear of any single punishment. And because prisons held people before judgment as well as after, confinement itself became psychologically powerful. A prisoner waiting in darkness could imagine many possible outcomes. Hope and dread existed side by side. Perhaps witnesses would defend you, perhaps they would not. Perhaps the Lord would show mercy. Perhaps political circumstances had changed. Perhaps your family had gathered enough money, or perhaps not. The slow waiting itself became part of the punishment. And beyond the prison walls, the community continued watching. Medieval justice was highly public, not only because authorities wanted deterrence, but because communities themselves participated in maintaining order. Neighbors reported suspicious behavior. Guilds regulated members. Religious institutions shaped moral expectations. Families protected reputations. In this world, prisons symbolized exclusion from normal social life. A prisoner temporarily disappeared from the rhythms of work, worship, trade, and family. That separation carried emotional power, especially in societies where communal identity mattered deeply. Yet, medieval people also understood mercy. Pardons existed. Religious holidays sometimes brought releases. Rulers occasionally reduced punishments to display generosity. Negotiation remained possible. This complexity is important. The medieval justice system was neither uniformly cruel nor consistently fair. It was deeply human, fragmented, uneven, influenced by fear, faith, custom, power, and practical necessity. And prisons stood at the center of many of those tensions. In the final main section, We will explore how medieval prisons slowly changed over time and how later generations began rethinking the purpose of imprisonment itself. Part 5. The slow change of prisons. As the medieval period gradually moved toward the early modern world, prisons slowly began to change. These changes did not happen quickly. They unfolded unevenly across centuries and regions, but over time, ideas about punishment, government, and social order slowly evolved, and prisons evolved with them. In the early Middle Ages, imprisonment had usually been temporary. Authorities preferred punishments that resolved matters directly through fines, exile, corporal punishment, or execution. Long-term imprisonment was expensive and difficult to manage, but as kingdoms grew stronger and cities expanded, governments gradually developed more organized administrative systems. Written records improved, courts became more structured, urban populations increased, trade networks expanded, and rulers sought greater control over legal authority. These developments slowly transformed the role of prisons. In larger cities especially, permanent jail facilities became more common. Some governments began maintaining prisons more systematically rather than relying entirely on improvised spaces inside castles or towers. At the same time, economic and social changes created new concerns. Urban authorities worried about poverty, vagrancy, theft, and social unrest in growing populations. As a result, confinement increasingly became part of broader strategies for controlling urban life. Still, many medieval problems remained. Prisons were overcrowded, disease spread easily, corruption continued. Wealthier prisoners often secured better conditions, and legal outcomes still depended heavily on status and local politics. Yet the idea of imprisonment itself slowly expanded. Rather than functioning only as temporary detention before punishment, prisons gradually became punishments in their own right more often. This transition would continue long after the Middle Ages ended. By the 16th and 17th centuries, some European societies began experimenting more actively with institutions designed for discipline, labor, and moral reform. These later developments slowly transformed European ideas about punishment and confinement over the centuries. But during the medieval period itself, prison remained deeply uncomfortable and uncertain. For ordinary people, the experience could feel terrifying precisely because so much depended on unstable conditions. You depended on the jailer. You depended on local courts. You depended on your family. You depended on weather, harvests, politics, and money. Even survival could not always be guaranteed. When historians study medieval prisons, they often rely on incomplete fragments. Official records survive unevenly. Some prisons left detailed financial accounts. Others disappeared almost entirely from history. Archaeologists uncover foundations, chains, locks, graffiti scratched into walls, and traces of daily life. Written sources reveal complaints about prison fees, descriptions of escapes, requests for mercy, and records of prisoners seeking release. Together, these fragments create a picture not of one single prison system, but of many overlapping local realities. That diversity matters. There was no universal medieval prison experience. Conditions in a wealthy Italian city differed from conditions in a rural fortress in Northern Europe. Religious courts operated differently from royal courts. Political prisoners lived differently from debtors. Yet certain themes appear repeatedly: uncertainty, dependence, inequality, isolation, and fear of losing connection to ordinary life. Because medieval society depended so heavily on personal relationships and daily labor, imprisonment disrupted existence at its foundations. A prisoner lost not only freedom, but also participation in the social world. And medieval people understood this deeply. That is partly why imprisonment carried such emotional weight, even when conditions were not uniformly violent. The prison represented separation from community, separation from routine, separation from certainty. Over time, thinkers and religious reformers occasionally criticized prison conditions. Some argued that excessive corruption among jailers was unjust. Others emphasized mercy, charity, or the moral responsibilities of rulers. But widespread reform moved slowly. Resources remained limited. Governments prioritized military defense, taxation, and political stability. And many rulers still viewed prisons mainly as practical tools, rather than institutions requiring humanitarian oversight. Even architecture reflected these priorities. Security mattered more than comfort. Thick walls prevented escape, small windows reduced risk. Heavy locks displayed authority. The emotional experience of imprisonment therefore became part of the design itself. The prisoner felt enclosed, watched, separated, and uncertain. Yet despite all these hardships, human resilience still appeared inside medieval prisons. Prisoners prayed. They formed friendships. They negotiated. They wrote letters when possible. Some carved messages into stone. Others sang songs, exchanged stories, or dreamed about release. Even in confinement, people searched for meaning and connection. That quiet persistence forms an important part of prison history too. The medieval world could be severe, but it was also filled with ordinary human emotions familiar across centuries: fear, hope, loneliness, relief, shame, endurance. And when you step back and view medieval prisons within the wider landscape of history, you begin to see something larger. Prisons reveal how societies understand authority. They show what governments fear. They expose inequalities. And they reflect changing ideas about punishment, morality, and human behavior. In medieval Europe, imprisonment existed within a fragile world shaped by local power, religious belief, agricultural labor, and constant uncertainty. Most people already lived close to hardship, so the threat of prison felt especially heavy. Not because prisons were always scenes of constant brutality, but because they represented instability entering every corner of life. A closed door, a delayed trial, a mounting debt, a damaged reputation, a family struggling outside the walls. These quiet fears often mattered as much as physical discomfort itself. And perhaps that is one reason medieval prison history remains so fascinating. It reminds us how deeply freedom is connected to ordinary routines. The ability to walk outside, to work, to speak with family, to hear familiar sounds, to participate in community life. When those things disappear, even temporarily, the emotional impact can become enormous. For medieval prisoners, that loss unfolded slowly beneath stone ceilings, behind heavy wooden doors, and within systems that often cared more about order than comfort. And so, for countless people across centuries of medieval history, prison became a place nobody wished to see from the inside. As the candles burned low across medieval towns and castles, prison walls remained standing quietly in the darkness. Behind them waited debtors, rebels, thieves, political prisoners, and ordinary people caught in the uncertainties of medieval life. Some stayed only a few days, others remained far longer. But for nearly all of them, imprisonment meant losing contact with the familiar rhythms of the outside world. And perhaps that is the lasting feeling carried through this history. Not simply fear of punishment, but fear of uncertainty. The uncertainty of waiting, depending on others, and not knowing what tomorrow might bring. Thank you for listening, and for spending this quiet journey through the long and shadowed world of medieval prisons.